Good. And then maybe we'll give it about 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and then we can officially start.
Just trying to print something.
That's fine. Perfectly fine. All right, 1 more minute and then we shall get started. Okay, we shall get started now. So, hi everyone. You are most welcome to episode 4 of our hashtag Politics Today series. My name is Margaret Mutumba, and I am the GSA Community Development Coordinator here at the University of Waterloo. We're excited about today's series with Alexandra, the Executive Director of the Social Development Center of Waterloo Region. This is one of the impactful organizations in our region supporting our communities, including graduate students, by providing fair and equitable access to social, economic, and political life here within our region. We are honored to be able to support the work on the center through our philanthropy fund, as well as showcasing here with Alexander presenting on the work of the organizations. Our goal for this series is to educate graduate students on current political events going on in our region and provide guidance or resources that will allow you to be more actively engaged in our community. And so I encourage you to visit our GSA YouTube page for our previous events. However, today we'll be listening from Alexandra and learn more about her, after which she'll present a bit more on the organization and the work that they're doing, followed by a Q&A session. Feel free to engage with the discussion today by asking questions using our Q&A function or offering any feedback in the comment section. So without further ado, I invite you, Alexandra, to please introduce yourself, share a little bit about your rich background and how you got involved in the center. You're most welcome too.
Thank you. Well, introductions. Community Development Center is community building and advocacy organization. My background starts with education, first in elementary schools and then through the civil war in ex-Yugoslavia, quickly being sucked into all the injustices, anti-war movement, feminist movement that were most progressive in those times. And that's when, as a late bloomer, I started learning about the world, actually. All that to say that at that point, adult education became the focus of my work, and my educational path shifted outside of the classrooms into the community, into the streets, and popular education is the language we were using, as opposed to public, right, which is formal institutional popular education, from literacy to other forms of education were necessary in those times, and ended up coordinating large national projects in mostly economic and political empowerment for women in the after war, Civil War period, immigrating to Quebec first, where I was really fascinated by the richness of their autonomous community organizing and the importance it has, and the importance that's recognized through funding by the provincial government there. And then moving back to Ontario, not back, but moving to Ontario in 2011, and finding a bit more, slower pace of advocacy. We are a part and a founding member of the Social Planning Network of Ontario. Social planning councils were for the last 3, almost 4 decades, backbones of knowledge creation and engagement in communities and progressive social policy making. And all those functions have been to great extent taken by different levels of government, right? Municipal institutions, even social agencies and funding agencies. That's what I learned and experienced here in Waterloo Region. So this was another adjustment. And at that time, Social Planning Council Kitchener-Waterloo was the place for me. I will be watching at the time as well, but all that to say, our conversation today is around affordable housing. And my work and engagement in housing issues, particularly supported tenants, lack of effective and efficient enforcement of tenants' rights in either of the provinces, Quebec or Ontario, led me to work with residents and resident groups and organizations that support them for 5 years in Quebec at least. And then moving to Ontario, it became very quickly one of the portfolios I had as a community development lead with Social Planning Council. So we rebranded in 2016 to reflect more of the work we're doing as a social development center, and understanding that some of the functions we historically had were now in the realm of other more resourced and more, more powerful players in the community. So who are we? We can, read, and I have our PowerPoint in front of us. And as Margaret said, equitable access to all aspects and domains of life. And it's huge mission statement for an organization that with that, with no longer performing certain functions in the community, lost a lot of its funding, right? And had to reinvent itself. So when we say that we work to increase citizen participation, increase understanding of the social, political, economic context in the region, build social infrastructure, community capacity, those are all very important and lofty goals. And if we have any influence, we have it not because we are strong or properly resourced to do the work that we do in the community, but because of this vision and mandate that we have. And at the same time, we realize that we have to unpack for ourselves what it means, what can be done with existing resources. And I will show you, quickly put chart for today that maps a very busy universe of affordable housing. Working with tenants and understanding the context where no longer with real estate investment trusts, right? The REITs and corporate management, something was off. Even working in the 2000s in Quebec, even smaller landlords are starting to follow up certain models and strategies, how to manage or mismanage or avoid managing their properties, extracting profit with minimal or no investment. Something was off. And the term financialization came into vocabulary when I moved here to Ontario, and I think the whole concept was coming from United States of America, right? But it is now, I think everybody has more or less a sense what it means. And imagine then an organization that is more grassroots like than a think tank or, big research or a social policy organization, or even large housing providers that we have in the region, fortunately, taking on some of the roles that we have taken, and it is absolutely a challenge. So I thought I would sprinkle ideas around inclusive decision making. I hope we have somewhat same idea what we mean by inclusive decision making, but I'm coming from the lens of organization that works with people who are absent from decision making in general. The higher we go, there are no traces of voices and stories. Even if they are, they're not taken seriously because only experts, people educated as we may be, who are trained to know and paid to know, only have a voice in systems. And we can and often become, victims to that whole ideology. And on the contrary, we're trying to unlearn all of that in the Social Development Center and give credit where credit is due for our social challenges, economic, political, including affordable housing. The solutions are only possible to be created or implemented by and with the people who are actually living the reality of being displaced, unhomed, their rights not respected. And it is tough negotiation, the language that we use. We have completely to reinvent the language that we use to talk to people who haven't walked the corridors and classrooms as we have. So think of us as a grassroots, more like, right? Even my title, executive director, does not represent who we are, right? I should be a coordinator, right? So a lot can be said about that. But coming back to the topic, inclusive decision making, for us, it is in the public realm, making sure that there is equity and representation of underserved, marginalized, racialized, excluded populations, groups, and communities from different cultures, faiths, language background, worldviews, and so forth, particularly looking at, as one of our staff repeats, Indigenous people are the first displaced people, right? And we're now in the realm of working with the University of Waterloo School of Planning, Professor Brand set his teams on mapping and understanding displacement in Waterloo Region. So absolutely yes to moratorium on development on the Haldeman Tract, Block 2 and Waterloo Region. So those are some of, again, enormous lofty goals for Social Development Center. But the only strength we rely on in day-to-day is working with different community grassroots advocacy, lived experience groups who mobilize when the conditions are right and when there is enough resources, even without resources, and put forward certain knowledge and pieces up front. So inclusive, I would say no, right? That's why we haven't seen improvement on homelessness and housing precarity, a lack of affordable housing since the 90s. We have all the data, we have all the calculations, right? It is cheaper to house people than to treat the outfall, right? The disaster that homelessness and precarious housing leaves behind. But we haven't moved the needle. So something is missing, right? Some would say political will, some would say economic models we live in, and so forth. But instead of, sprinkling all of this across the projects we work on, I would just open up with some of the things that have defined urban planning. I don't know how many planners are among you, but we have a lot of planning placement students coming or being attracted to organizations lately, and we learned loads that way. But basically, once there was disinvestment from federal and provincial government in creation and maintenance of affordable rental community supportive housing. Now all of those grants are expiring, and we do not know what will happen with rents and maintenance of some of the nonprofit or community housing across the country, right? We at the same time have a whole series of planning decisions that were unsustainable, right? And then we rush for solutions. How do we create cities and communities that are livable, just because of neglect in practices and planning that were inclusive. So there from the start, there wasn't inclusion. We still think that certain people have access to certain places, right? Not everybody, and particularly not Indigenous or Black or disabled or, low income. It's just a reality of the colonization and racism that's embedded in the foundations of how our systems and institutions were created. And once there is this shift, now we have to stop building outside, of the urban core and infringe on agricultural lands. How do we revive then core urban areas that have been disinvested for so long, right? And then the branding comes. Okay, we have this idea, and those are the financial markets, and we can invest as developers, and we can have prosperity, right? So success, prosperity. The branding started rolling across our region and across the globe, right? Marketing of new needs, right? Tiny condos with no kitchens, right? Or anything that we consider its progress today even in Waterloo Region through developments, right? And so new workforce, new population, targeting those that do have resources or they're fleeing even worse situations, right? For example, Toronto, right? And getting to this community and neglecting the needs of people who live there. So all of this top-down development and displacement that has been happening and from federal to municipal policies, right? How do we turn the tide, right? And Social Development Center, but just to tell you, all that I mentioned now, it would sound like this to people who are most impacted. Neglect, ignorance, one-way communication in terms of decision-making, radio silence, dragging feet, lip service, political trade-offs, and misdirections. And currently we're in a phase of the greatest misdirection, which is, no, if we have enough supply, right? Simply, miraculously, the prices will go down. In financialized global markets, well, we're not in the 19th century, right? Or beginning of 20th, when supply and demand had any meaning economically, right? Today, those are the algorithms in those markets that many few of us understand. And on the ground, as many of our academics, right, including Martin August, Brian Doucette, Sean Goby, all the names probably, right, are saying the only way how prices are calculated is what was yesterday's price on a house. I can beat that. That's the only way how actually, price of homes and rentals can be this high day after day, day after day, right? And leaving so many behind. So I will just open up just to hold a conversation. I'm looking at the time, and I think I may have 10 minutes, but I will share handmade map. I'm not sure which one I'm sharing. I'm sharing my email or I'm sharing the map.
You are sharing your PowerPoint.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. So there should be something to put me in the presentation mode. Right. So a very, very, very busy affordable housing universe. What you see here is Social Development Center and who we have worked with most. And what are some of the orange projects around us, right? So who are the biggest player in terms of housing and homelessness service provision? Of course, Regional Waterloo. And they work with the whole network of housing and shelter providers and other supports and services for residents in this realm. And Social Development Center would not be a part of this cohort if it were not for the pandemic, right? So when COVID started, our connections, community connections with a number of grassroots communities allowed us to be heard and contribute to the whole task force pandemic service planning. Important thing is that we started with the beginning of the pandemic with a mobilization under Civic Hub. Civic Hub is a place for grassroots and volunteer-led organizations to come together. So some of those initiatives and groups came together and said this is unacceptable, absolutely, and individuals, advocates, right? We have a lot of outspoken advocates in the community saying the cities have shut down, right, on homeless people. Now they really have nowhere to go. No drinking water, no water to wash hands, right? We have to stop criminalizing poverty and allowing for sanctioned encampments. So that convergence actually brought us into the conversations with the region. We're monitoring the housing 5-year plan and the investment that's being made with an objective of 2,500 units to be created. But it will include a lot of attainable housing. So not affordable, not deeply affordable, whatever we want to call, which would be 30% of the income of minimum wage earners, right? So there is this huge expectation that we will have more newer shelter spaces and also supportive housing constructed. But we're hearing also a lot about more staff coming to approve more development projects that actually end up being only attainable, and for earners over 60, 70,000 dollars per year or more, right? So we're looking at that and Unsheltered campaign kind of wind down because we did not have enough people to support the research and advocacy. It's a hint for you. After a Q&A, we can, or maybe we can include it in Q&A, what are some of the opportunities for your contribution? So Better Tent City was also a community initiative, mobilization in connection to the Unsheltered campaign. And our role at this point is absolute support and advocacy for it. One of our board members is a member of the leadership team, following through with all the moves and transformations that are happening. But as an organization, we are a philanthropic partner, mostly for this initiative, making sure that enough of community donations are going to the project. And it's a very special project. It's so grassroots. It understands where people are at. It does not expect them, as Wood Ontario works, to get up in the morning and go look for work, or even work or keep their jobs, right? So it's a very vulnerable, it's highly traumatized population that does not abide by the rules that we consider normal and everyday because of our privilege. So highly, innovative project, experimental in a way, trying to support those that systems cannot support. And with collaboration with City of Kitchener, we have been part of a development in 2020, the whole year of the housing strategy that is now started in implementation, and advocated together with other lived experience voices at that table that we do need for particular parts of implementation of the strategy, people with lived experience, actual tenants who are low income, precariously employed, and who have been marginalized in so many ways, to monitor the success and implementation of the strategy in the lower end of the continuum, housing continuum, which is from homelessness to affordable rental housing, right? So what is city doing in that arena? And they're the only ones to say if it's successful or not. So that initiative should start. Lived experience working group, right? And we are in collaboration, of course, with property standards, bylaw enforcement, which ties into funding we received from United Way to work more on eviction prevention, and particularly for Indigenous, Black people of color, LGBTQ2+, and newcomer populations. Hope I'm not talking too fast. But we're coming now to the University of Waterloo as one of the major partners, and there are many intersections of things happening in the community. Working with Brian Doucette was absolute privilege, as he understands how different social development center would be from, for example, House of Friendship, right? Or the Working Center, Luther, with other major housing and homeless supports, and that difference is stark. And he understands that when we adjust our language and when we work with through the methods that are respectful to realities and trauma that people lived, we can get a lot more voices into the conversation. And that's how we supported research on changing neighborhoods along the light rail transit in Kitchener-Waterloo, and worked with his team since then, moving into two other research studies, based on his first one, where we recruited low-income residents around LRT, and then we focus specifically in our mapping of displacement study published on our website on marginalized groups and their experience of displacement. And currently, with the support of City of Kitchener, we are looking what does displacement look like outside of the urban core, right? It's different in many regards. And absolutely, racism and discrimination are alive and kicking. There aren't enough protections at all for people to assert their rights. Going to, under a human rights tribunal is scary as anything else they've been through. We don't have proper monitoring and recording who has been evicted, renovated, displaced through demolitions, new constructions, and so forth. So our project is a grassroots project with Professor Brian Doucette and his team to start giving it some tangible face, not only numbers. We identified 156 locations through 50 interviews. And we're talking about multiple units in those locations. And we're talking about, hundreds and hundreds of people that have been displaced. And that's the continuation we would like to see with working with other municipal partners, the region and the cities, how to quantify and work with real-time trends, right? Not wait for a couple of years for big data to give us a sense of who may have been displaced, because displacement is not even showing on a radar of the official reports. Imagine, right? Because no indicators are tracked, and policy doesn't require us to track qualitative data, right? So what doesn't show in income or education as the population changes is not visible to policymakers. So imagine what a lofty goal it is to convince decision makers that the knowledge that comes directly from the people is the knowledge we need to solve housing crisis. There's a lot more to say about that, but truly, if you have questions about displacement study, you can always check in with us or talk with us. So Margaret, I mean, there are many other players, right? City of Waterloo has now started developing their housing strategy. The communication and interest in working with people with lived experience is rudimentary, really. It's just a statement, more or less, at this point. City of Kitchener has gone through a couple of loops, and especially in the last year through the Affordable Housing Advisory, learned a lot, and also had a head start with the equity work. And some of those advocacy voices converged and are creating opportunities for us to collaborate more directly in that process and support people with lived experience who never can fit into the boardroom elite spaces, right? How do we take them apart, brick by brick, and be a working group that works from within the community in ways that people can relate to. So those are some of the big, pieces. City of Cambridge has a couple of initiatives, but not a congruent stream of affordable housing strategy. There is a Housing Innovation Roundtable, where some of the nonprofit housing workers sit, regional staff. It's coordinated through Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation. Leadership Waterloo is contributing some of the work through their cohorts. And there is so many players, right? But if you look at what we're doing, it's bringing to the front knowledge that actually nobody wants, right? Data that people are not sure what to do with, right? And making sure that quantitative way we collect and analyze data for policy is inadequate. We have to understand it's inadequate, just does not improving the lives of people most impacted. So that's who we are in terms of affordable housing universe, and that's for today.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for that comprehensive background and taking us back and sharing why the state of the region is in the state that it's in. Bring on all players and the work that you've been doing. And so as you were speaking, please, you are welcome to ask questions in the Q&A section. And as we wait for your questions, I will share my questions just from listening to you speak. Given that I'm relatively new to the region, something that you spoke about was the Tenancy Act and the fact that it was not being enforced. And I just wondered if you can, for those who might not have any clue what it is and maybe why it's not being enforced, just to help us understand a bit more about that statement.
Well, student population is one of the most impacted, right? And we see how different cities are working through ensuring some decency and dignity for students as tenants. There isn't enforcement strong enough. First, when we look at the Residential Tenancies Act, it remains it needs to be updated, right? And what we have in legislation from the province is negligence in terms of accepting that rent decontrols for certain types of housing, like all the new builds since 2018. They're actually, like, statements like that in law are an incentive for landlords to say we want loyal tenants, but actually they're incentivized to flip them as fast as they can, because there's no ceiling to how much they can increase rents once the unit gets empty. So there are elements like that in the legislation that are hurting the whole relationship and between landlords and tenants, right? So with big companies as well, allowing for certain types of developments, not controlling what is being built, right? When you look at who the developers or REITs are accountable to, they're accountable to their shareholders. Tenant is not in the equation. It's a collateral. It's profit extraction, resource. And by creating that type of relationship or lack of, because your tenant should be your client if there is to be any type of mutual respectful relationship. We have legislation that it needs to change, and those are just some of the examples. On the other hand, landlord and tenant board has always been an elite boardroom space where the underserved and marginalized, racialized, excluded populations never or rarely, very rarely could participate fully, make their case, get proper representation, duty counsel, accompaniment, and now they have to have functioning internet and device, because from now on, unless you submit a special request for accommodation, all the hearings at landlord and tenant board would be online. So where to begin unpacking the process at the landlord and tenant board, that's not, feels like tribunal, right? And the mediators, their role and their training, and it's a very complex issue. And those are not new things for the province, right? Advocacy groups, many of them in Toronto, but through Social Planning Network, we know of others in different communities have been advocating for those changes, and they still do. And lastly, when it comes to enforcement, municipal bylaws, they do not adequately protect tenants, and they are not resourced enough to do the scope of the work that needs to be done in the community. So our collaboration is to understand their limits and spaces for improvement. We've been working with particularly City of Kitchener property standards, and improved some of the processes while working in Trainer Vanier for a number of years together. But still, most of the abuse, harassment, discrimination is still going under the radar and happening under the radar. We have community legal services here in Waterloo Region. They're doing their best, but still not many people that are most impacted actually know that them or us exist as supports, right? They're just taking their hardship and not having even energy to follow through multiple threads of activity that they have to monitor. It's not built in the enforcement systems. I mean, fire is really good. Fire does follow up. If it's 14 days for a landlord to take action, they call the 15th and they take action. It's not the case across the board. And tenants have to work with community legal services if they want to, break their lease or get some compensation, and then, keep in tune with that process. And at the same time, they're living with, pest and improper heating or cooling, and no hot water or heating in winters. And they have to constantly remind and bicker the management that's irresponsive, at the same time, keep tabs on what deadline has, gone through to get to the inspector. So it's impossible. And unfortunately, I've been in that situation, and I would not be surprised if many, many of your members have gone through the similar, and you just do the best you can, but it's not right. It's not just, and it's not equitable to lay such a burden on most underserved members of our community. So long story short, or short story long, there is a lot to be done in terms of protection of tenants' rights.
Thank you so much for that in-depth response. And actually, it was leading really well into the next question. Recently, the GSA and our undergraduate student organization carried out a housing survey. And some of the things that you've mentioned came out of that. Students either experiencing racism or coming under eviction notice, or some students who are actually homeless. So from your experience, and actually I wanted to know how your organization would be able to get involved, what are the tangible steps that some of our community can take if they find themselves in this predicament, in addition to unlivable conditions, as you've mentioned?
There are services on campus, right? And I know that part of it used to be student-led, and peer support was provided in most of the cases, and some of it is for a fee, right? You contribute through the admin fees. But as our two eviction prevention peer workers say, not every service is for everybody, right? So sometimes it's about who you know and you're comfortable with unpacking some of the very, very uncomfortable, sometimes perceived as shameful, as if we're to blame, right, for what's happening to us, which is in most cases not true. So in terms of peer supports and student organization supports, it's about organizing. It's right about hearing more who is in the same situation and what can we do collectively. I think that's the beauty of what I've seen in some of the organizing. But in terms of the work of our eviction prevention staff, one of them is in Cambridge an area, and the other one is in Kitchener-Waterloo. It's absolutely talking to them because they have lived experience and they are members of marginalized, racialized groups. They look at holistic supports that include emotional, psychological, right? Besides logistical, bringing back the self-determination and understanding that shame has no place in most of the cases where people do not ask for help. So there are, for different people, different solutions. If they need legal advice and duty counsel, absolutely community legal services, right, in Kitchener, and they do serve the whole region. In terms of resolving issues before eviction, renoviction, negotiating and mediating, then absolutely our staff is there up to a point when it's legal advice to try and resolve issues early on. And they would support people as well, not only with technology or access to internet, but as well being that peer in a room, right? Even if they cannot speak during the line return board hearing, just being there, taking notes, and being the support for people as they go through the hearings is extremely important. So those are some of the things and options that your members and community members would have in the community.
Thanks for that. And maybe one last question, for instance, as graduate students on a more policy level, or you're talking about those boardroom discussions. So for instance, personally, I sit on one of the committees within the city of Waterloo, and they did bring forward the affordable housing project, wanting community engagement and obviously feedback from key stakeholders. What could many students who might be in similar rooms do to bring the voices of those who have actually gone through these experiences forward? What can we propose so that those voices are lifted up, or how can we support that process?
Thank you for that question. It's extremely important, right? It's like changing from bystander or, oh, I'm so glad, I'm so privileged to be in this room. So, I want rock the boat. We all go through those processes, right? And what we can do is a couple of things, right? But definitely point that one-time consultation is not what our problems need or what our situation calls for. Usually those broad surveys, on Engage online or you can print them, right? And still you will not hear many marginalized voices respond or be able to respond. So what we are talking and implementing occasionally in certain cases with our partners, be it Regional Waterloo with Wellbeing Waterloo Region Survey or City of Kitchener Housing Strategy, is insisting on a different type of engagement. We have extraordinary advocacy groups, neighborhood groups, community groups, interest groups, as I said, that are volunteer-led or small nonprofits in some cases, or just informal groups who have been together for ages advocating around housing, for example, right? So how do you, instead of picking their brains for free usually, and then bringing it into the black box, into the system that's already prone, right, with racism and colonialism and, discriminatory ways of prejudice and elite ways of thinking, and then do something with it that's acceptable, either politically or due to resources, and create solutions that are actually suiting us who have privilege. And we say we talk to people, right? And then even if our recommendations from the boardrooms, right, or elite spaces reflect some of what was said, the relationship is severed. There is no accountability going back to the people who actually participated or were active, right? And again, when it comes to implementation, it will be, again, another set of people or staff, right? Not the ones who were the source of knowledge, not the ones who tried doing their best to interpret it and create recommendations, but another group of people that, like, the connection is so weak at the end that we fall back in our work into doing what has been done yesterday because it worked yesterday, and we forget about the source of it all. So the ways to ask about having ongoing way to communicate, two-way communication with particular groups or populations or demographics, to nurture those connections, to support them so they can be knowledge makers in their own right, to compensate them for the time and knowledge that they're bringing to the table, involving them in the implementation phases of anything that they consulted on, and having them all the way there until the end when the assessment, right, and transformational thinking happens, and what is it we can do better next time? When that happens, they need to be there. So having people impacted from the first step along the way, if you really want to address their lives and improve their lives and our lives at the end of the day, right? It impacts our lives too. So we're addressing all our lives. But if we want to be responsive and we want representation, then we don't let go. We make mistakes, right? We may even re-traumatize when we ask them to repeat what they've been saying for like a decade or two, because that's what we're doing. There is, right, knowledge that has been there and never put into practice. So we take them with us. We adapt, we all adapt, and we are there all the way in the process. Of course, it's not always possible, but we can always ask for it all the way.
That's a fantastic suggestion. From the beginning to the end of whatever you're trying to achieve, work with the communities. And this is in any, I guess, project that you might be doing that impacts communities, have them involved from the start all the way to the finish, so that that chain of communication or the message that they're bringing is not broken. I really appreciate that. As we come to the top of the hour, I guess last but not least, how can we as a Graduate Student Association be of value to the Social Development Center? What places can we come in, or how would you foresee us being involved with the work that you're doing? And how can we reach you?
Um, Right. So most of the things that you need in terms of contact is, of course, on our website, waterlooregion.org, right? And not Regional Waterloo, right? We're an independent charitable organization, right? So waterlooregion.org, and all our contacts and our projects are there. We will improve the website, I promise. It's just not a priority, right? And I think you understand after the whole hour we've spent together. There are really different ways. So you all probably heard about a better tent city, but you really haven't connected or you don't understand how important that particular project is in our community. We will always connect you to one of our board members, Laura Hamilton, who is tireless in her work and supports. And there is, from cooking to logistics to repairs that need to be done, right? There is a lot of tasks that could be taken hands-on, but the transformational experience, everybody who steps and their foot and stays in that environment, the learning is, I think second to none, right? It shifts how we see the world and understand the subcultures that we may not have been exposed to due to, certain privilege that we have, right? Which is poverty and criminalization of poverty. So that's one of the things. Unfortunately, our Unsheltered campaign did not have enough, after a year and some wind in its sails, but the whole campaign around sanctioned settlements for people who are unhomed in our community, so they don't have to hide, can be, accessed by services and supports. Being allowed to be, right, in public places, because that's should be a commons, a realm where nobody's excluded, right? That work is extremely important, but we needed research, we needed communications, we needed to mobilize with some new energy all those groups that we like to work within the Civic Hub, right? Civic Hub is one of our mobilization and support projects. It's a physical space as well. So that would be amazing. Lived experience groups, they're aging, disabilities and human rights, awareness of low-income voices, renters educating, networking together, right? And they need support not only to rejuvenate, to get more members back, but they need a lot of, again, research or writing or preparing for media, right? Or preparing when they invite decision makers into their meetings, right? How to think, and it's always two-way direction, right? So it's important when we enter the space we haven't been in before, to truly try to just sense the energy and understand what exactly those groups would need, but they need to get stronger, right? And lastly, in the Civic Hub, we had, before pandemic, over 30 grassroots groups that would be coming with a range of needs. And most of them did come together around affordable housing. And we host open sessions or working sessions with members of different communities that are underserved and marginalized. And we do not have enough hands on deck from logistics, right? If we want to be accessible, is signage there? Can people operate the elevator? Can we welcome them in? If they need a quiet space, how do we make sure they're there? If they want to be a part of the buzzing conversation, how can we facilitate it? Who takes notes, right? Who does maybe some background research? So really, from human interaction with the members of those grassroots groups to some of the logistical pieces. And the more we work that way in municipal processes, we understand that we really need more people, right, that are dedicated for a certain period of time, just to make sure the process develops respectfully, and that we have all the resources to do what we know we need to do, but cannot do, right? Because there are not enough hands on deck. Hope that helps.
That absolutely helps. Thank you so, so much. And to our graduate community, Alexander, you have shared a great picture as to how we can get involved, which is in many different ways. So I encourage us and I invite us to please take up the offer to be more engaged in our community. Affordable housing impacts our community and us as students. So this is an issue that's close to heart as well, that will benefit the next generation that's coming along so that they don't have to face the same challenges. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your time with us today. We know you're extremely busy, but we're so grateful that you could grace us today. And I invite you to just share maybe your last thoughts or last piece of guidance just before we close today.
Oh, well, I think I've said enough today. And I hope that there will be no last words, but next first words as we meet again in different capacity. Some of your members to come and continue the conversation right there in the community. Let's leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Well said. First words. This is just the beginning. And so that concludes our series today. You can find it on YouTube, and please do get in touch with the Social Development Center and get behind the great work that they're doing. Thank you and good evening.
Take care, everyone.